My name is Carla, and I'm a doctor by profession, a healer by calling, and a lover by heart. I met Ben during my residency. He was an engineer, pragmatic where I was empathetic, grounded where I was empathetic, grounded where I was a dreamer. But despite our seemingly opposite personalities, we had a shared vision for the kind of life we wanted, a life of meaningful work, adventure, and an endless pursuit of love. We were the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that didn't just fit. We completed each other. Our first meeting was anything but ordinary. We were both volunteers at a charity event for underprivileged children, and I was in charge of the first aid booth. Ben came by with a small cut on his finger, sustained from setting up a tent. When our eyes met, I felt an inexplicable pull, like gravity was pulling me toward him. "Looks like you need a doctor," I said, putting on gloves. "I was actually hoping to find one," he grinned. It was a small cut, but the moment lingered as I bandaged it up. Our eyes met again, and right then and there, I knew I had found something extraordinary. "Does it hurt?" I asked, securing the last bit of bandage. "Only when I laugh," he joked, his eyes twinkling. From that day on, we became inseparable. Our dates were a blend of romantic dinners and long walks, intellectual conversations, and silly banter. We reveled in our shared dreams and aspirations, and we built our love story one moment at a time. The proposal was nothing short of magical. Ben took me to the very spot where we first met. This time, instead of a first aid booth, there was a beautifully laid out picnic. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, he got down on one knee. "Carla, will you be the cure to my every ailment, the joy in all my days, and the love of my life?" he asked, holding out a ring that seemed to sparkle as much as his eyes. Tears of joy filled my eyes. Yes, 1,000 times yes. We celebrated our wedding with our closest friends and family. It was an enchanting day that felt lifted right out of a fairy tale. The theme was Enchanted Garden, a tribute to our shared love for the natural world and its wonders. As I walked down the aisle, the air seemed to shimmer with love and excitement. When we said our vows, it was as though time stopped, capturing us in our own perfect bubble of happiness. However, amidst the laughter and joy, the tinkling of glasses and the soft melodies, lurked a shadow. Ben's parents, Mark and Susan. They sat in the back, their faces a blend of forced smiles and visible discomfort. Even on this day, the most special day of our lives, they seemed to be judging me, sizing me up as if my credentials were something to be looked down upon. My profession was an issue for them, but little did they know it would become their greatest concern in the years to come. So, while our wedding day was almost perfect, it held the seed of a problem that would grow to become a wedge between our families. Yet for all its looming darkness, it was overshadowed by the love Ben and I had for each other, a love so deep and unconditional that it would endure even the most bitter of life's trials. We were a team, and come what may, we would face it together. The euphoria of marital bliss continued unabated for Ben and me, and a few years into our marriage, we found ourselves ready for a new milestone, buying our first home. We spent countless weekends attending open houses, poring over real estate listings, and envisioning our future in each empty space we explored. Finally, we found it, a charming two-story house with a garden out back, located in a peaceful neighborhood. It was just perfect for the two of us, a physical manifestation of our shared dreams and the life we envisioned. "We did it, Carla! We actually did it!" Ben said, his voice tinged with awe, as we stood in the empty living room the day we got the keys. "We did," I agreed, looking around and imagining our future in these walls. "It feels like—" "Yes, it does," he smiled, pulling me into a hug. But even as we celebrated, I felt a weight descend upon me. There was one issue we couldn't escape, even in this joyous moment, the looming involvement of Ben's parents, Mark and Susan. Ever the optimist, Ben believed that a housewarming party, a celebration of our new life, could perhaps melt the ice that had always chilled my relationship with them. "We should have a housewarming party, invite friends, family, everyone," Ben proposed one evening, his eyes shining with excitement. "Everyone, huh?" I replied, my voice betraying my hesitation. "Does that include your parents?" "Carla, I know it's tough with them, but this is a new chapter for us. Maybe it'll be a new chapter with them, too. We have to try, right?" He looked at me, hopeful and earnest. I sighed. "All right, if you think it could work, let's give it a try. For us." And so, the invitations were sent, the RSVPs came pouring in, and the day arrived. As I set the tables, arranged the flowers, and prepped the food, I felt a sense of pride in what Ben and I had built. Our love had carried us through so much, and this home was a testament to our resilience and shared dreams. I wanted to believe that the warmth of our home could thaw even the iciest of relationships. Yet, as I looked at Ben, who was bustling around, setting up the sound system for the evening, I couldn't shake off the apprehension that crept into my heart. The tension that had always existed with Mark and Susan felt like a dark cloud on this sunny day. I took a deep breath and told myself to hope for the best. As the clock ticked closer to the party's start time, I looked at Ben and said, "Well, this is it. Our home is as ready as it'll ever be to welcome our life, and whoever wants to be part of it." He kissed my forehead, and that's all that matters. But when the doorbell rang announcing Mark and Susan's arrival, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Could our new home and the happiness it represented be enough to bridge years of misunderstandings and judgments? The door swung open, and there they stood, any hope I had held shriveled in the frosty air that followed them in. Their entrance didn't just bring them into our home. It carried in a tempest of tension that no housewarming could mitigate. The stage was set, and little did we know that this gathering would become the battleground for hidden animosities and unspoken grievances. And I, once again, found myself at the eye of the storm. Our living room was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Friends and colleagues mingled, admiring the tasteful decor and the obvious effort we had put into making our house a home. The atmosphere was charged with joy, and for a few fleeting moments, I allowed myself to get lost in it. But each time I caught sight of Mark and Susan standing awkwardly in a corner, my heart sank a little. As the night wore on, I knew I had to make an effort. For Ben's sake, if not my own, I walked over to where they stood, my smile a carefully constructed mask hiding the unease I felt. "So, what do you think of the place?" I asked, gesturing at our carefully curated home. "It's quaint," Susan replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "Quite cozy, isn't it?" "Thank you, we love it," I said, struggling to maintain my composure. Mark snorted. "Working hard is relative, isn't it? Some people save lives and think they've conquered the world." Feeling a sting from his words, I glanced towards Ben. He was engrossed in a conversation, but looked up just in time to catch my eye. He sensed the tension from across the room. "Is everything okay here?" Ben interrupted, walking over. "Of course, darling," Susan responded, her tone shifting remarkably. "We were just admiring your lovely home." Before Ben could respond, Mark's voice cut through the air like a serrated knife. "Don't show your face to us again," he said, eyes locked onto mine. The room seemed to go quiet, the earlier chatter fading into a dull murmur. I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation and indignation, but before I could speak, Ben stepped in. "You need to leave. Now," he said firmly, his voice tinged with a finality I had never heard before. Mark and Susan looked stunned, but Ben's face was resolute. "If you can't respect my wife in our own home, then you're not welcome here," he declared. Mark opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came. Susan, realizing the gravity of the situation, tugged at his arm, and they made their way to the door. Ben closed it behind them, his hands trembling. When he turned back to face me, his eyes were filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "I'm sorry, Carla. I thought they could change. I thought this home could be a new beginning for all of us," he said, his voice cracking. I put my hand on his cheek, feeling the tension in his face. "We did think that, Ben. And it's not your fault that they chose not to be a part of it. Our home doesn't need negativity. It's built on love, our love, and that's all that matters." As we returned to the party, attempting to salvage the remains of the evening, I couldn't shake off the heaviness that had settled in my heart. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a new emotion emerged: resolve. Mark and Susan had thrown down the gauntlet, but what they didn't realize was that I was more than ready to pick it up. From that point on, the terms were set, lines were drawn, and the icy relationship reached its chilling climax. The home that was supposed to be our sanctuary had been tainted, but it had also become a crucible for decisions that would define family dynamics for years to come. As the party continued around us, it was abundantly clear that while our house was full, it was far from whole. In the weeks following the housewarming debacle, life resumed its usual pace. The clinic where I worked was busier than ever, and I sought solace in the rhythms of my routine. The familiar sounds of patient consultations, the beeping of machines, and the hum of voices provided a therapeutic backdrop against the disquiet that had settled within me. Yet no amount of professional success could fully erase the taste of humiliation I had endured at my own housewarming party. During a late shift, I confided in Dr. Sarah, a seasoned colleague who had become a close friend. As I recounted the harrowing tale, her eyes widened with disbelief. "Carla, that's outrageous! You've been nothing but a loving, supportive partner to Ben. And your work here. God, you're a healer. You help people for a living." "I know, Sarah, but to them, it's as if I'm unworthy of being in their family because of my profession," I sighed. "Well, it's their loss, isn't it?" she said. "They should know what people like us go through, the responsibilities we bear. Maybe then they'd think twice about their narrow-mindedness." Her words planted a seed in my mind, one that soon sprouted into a full-blown idea for retribution. I couldn't change Mark and Susan's prejudices, but I could make them see the value of my work, the significance of the profession they looked down upon so scornfully. The opportunity to execute my plan arrived sooner than expected. A month later, Susan had to undergo a series of tests for a medical issue she was experiencing. As fate would have it, she was referred to the very clinic where I worked. Of course, I was professional. I had no direct contact with her during her visits. However, I did have influence over the staff and certain administrative procedures. Make sure to swap Mrs. Smith's results with Mrs. Johnson's. I discreetly instructed the technician in charge of Susan's tests, ensuring that her identity was protected. It's crucial for a research study we're conducting on statistical anomalies. It's highly confidential. The technician nodded, understanding the gravitas of the task. So, for the next several visits, Susan received the wrong tests. The confusion and concern escalated with each appointment, compelling her to confront her own vulnerability and the necessity of accurate medical care. And then, calls started coming in. "Carla, these tests, I've taken them multiple times and the results are different every time. What's happening?" Susan's voice trembled as she spoke. Remembering her snide comments and haughty attitude, I felt a surge of vindication. Yet my tone was measured as I responded. "Well, Susan, it's important to always listen to and respect your doctors. Medical science is a complicated field. Maybe you should consult with your healthcare team and follow their advice." Days turned into weeks, and the cycle continued. Eventually, the anomalies were corrected, and Susan received her accurate test results. Though she was none the wiser about the mix-up, she had lived through the agony of uncertainty, a lesson in humility served cold. I had administered a prescription of revenge, one that left no trace, yet had potent effects. Ben never found out what I did, and I didn't feel the need to tell him. Some things are better left unsaid. However, the incident marked a turning point in our family dynamics. There was a newfound, albeit grudging, respect that emerged from Mark and Susan. They never apologized, and I never expected them to, but their icy demeanor thawed just a fraction, as if acknowledging for the first time that I was someone not to be trifled with. Our home remained a sanctuary for love and mutual respect. As for Mark and Susan, they were reminded of their own fallibility, taught by the very profession they had so disdainfully dismissed. My fairy tale didn't have a perfect ending, but it had its moments of poetic justice. And sometimes that's all you need. The days following my calculated plan of revenge were unlike any others I'd ever experienced. Each time I walked into the clinic, I felt an additional weight on my shoulders, a combination of satisfaction, regret, and anxiety. What had I done? Was it justified? The questions plagued my mind, but each time I remembered the humiliation and contempt I had faced, I found my resolve strengthening. My actions had been extreme, yes, but so had theirs. A couple of weeks later, Susan was scheduled for a follow-up consultation at the clinic. I could sense the tension in the air when she walked in, clutching a piece of paper with her latest test results. She looked lost, her eyes searching for something or someone to make sense of her situation. This time, her results were accurate but complicated enough to require specialized interpretation. Susan found herself dependent on the very institution she had belittled, the medical profession. I watched from a distance as Dr. Sarah, who had become my unwitting ally in this intricate game, sat down with Susan to discuss her tests. "I don't understand these results, doctor. Are they good or bad?" Susan inquired, her voice tinged with genuine concern. "Mrs. Hamilton, the tests indicate that you have some borderline markers. Normally, we would recommend lifestyle adjustments and continuous monitoring," Dr. Sarah replied professionally. "But what does that mean?" Susan pressed, visibly anxious. "It means you should listen to your doctors and take our advice seriously," Dr. Sarah said, her eyes meeting mine for a split second across the room. Failure to do so could result in unnecessary complications. After the consultation, Dr. Sarah came over to me. I felt an odd sense of satisfaction telling her that, she confessed. Like I was standing up for all of us. "You were," I replied softly, acknowledging her unspoken solidarity. The ironic twist to this chapter of my life was that the wrong test, the mistake, had forced Susan to confront her prejudices. And while she may not have completely abandoned her disdain for my profession or me, she had learned the hard way to respect the field I belonged to. Each wrong test she had received was a test of her character, and it was clear she had been unprepared for it. I was equally unprepared for the phone call that came the next day. It was Susan. "Carla, I've been thinking," she began hesitantly. "I know we've had our differences, but I want to thank you. Your colleagues have been very patient with me." "Your health is important, Susan," I replied cautiously, choosing my words with precision. "You should always trust and respect the professionals who are trained to help you." "You're right," she conceded, and I could almost hear her teeth grinding over the phone. "One should always listen to and respect doctors." That was as close to an apology as I was ever going to get, and in that moment, I decided it was enough. My plan had worked, not in turning enemies into friends, but in forcing them to acknowledge their own fallibilities, their own prejudices. I had administered the wrong test to get the right result, leveraging my professional expertise to expose their ignorance and arrogance. And so, the fairy tale continued, but it was no longer a tale of unconditional love and acceptance. It had evolved into a more complex narrative, replete with shades of gray. There was love, yes, but there was also understanding that sometimes you have to fight for your place, even if it means going against the traditional norms of familial love and unity. I had earned my place not by conformity, but by defiance, and for the first time, I felt truly at home. As the months rolled on, the atmosphere around our family gatherings underwent a subtle change. Mark and Susan still wore their prejudices like old garments, faded but familiar, yet there was a new element present: restraint. Conversations were laced with an unspoken understanding that they had been humbled, however minutely, by their own vulnerabilities. They never acknowledged it, but I could see it in their eyes, the begrudging admission that I was part of a profession they couldn't afford to belittle anymore. Irony! That ever-present artist painted its masterpiece when Mark started experiencing health issues. One evening, Ben received a call from his mom, her voice shaking as she detailed Mark's condition. He was to undergo a complicated surgical procedure, and they had a choice of doctors. As it happened, one of the recommended specialists was a close colleague of mine, Dr. Martinez. Ben hung up the phone and turned to me. "It's Dad. He needs surgery. Dr. Martinez is one of the options. Should I tell them to go with him?" I paused, contemplating the implications. Recommending Dr. Martinez would be a silent assertion of my influence, a professional endorsement they would be forced to take seriously. But could I put my feelings aside to offer an objective opinion? "He's an excellent surgeon, one of the best in his field," I finally said. "If it were me, I wouldn't think twice." And so, the recommendation was made, and they accepted it. A week before the surgery, Mark and Susan came over for dinner. It was an awkward affair, full of pauses and hesitations, but there was an undercurrent of desperation, a muted plea for support. Eventually, Mark broke the silence. "Carla, we've gone with Dr. Martinez. Ben says you speak highly of him." "I do. He's an expert, very skilled." "You're in good hands," I assured him. He nodded, locking eyes with me. Hearing Mark speak those words was the validation I didn't know I needed. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and in that moment, it felt like enough. "Thank you, Mark," I said, holding back a torrent of emotions. "Remember, the medical field is a collective endeavor. You're not just putting your faith in Dr. Martinez. You're putting your faith in all of us, in the whole system." Susan chimed in, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "We've learned that the hard way, haven't we? We're grateful, Carla, truly." Gratitude and humility. These were new colors on them, but they wore them well. And so, as Mark's surgery approached, an unspoken agreement settled over us like a soft mist. We were a fractured family, stitched together by circumstance and choice, but we were still a family. And while my revenge had been a bitter pill for them to swallow, it had also been a wake-up call, forcing them to face the prejudices that had soiled our relationships. The day of the surgery arrived and Dr. Martinez performed brilliantly. Mark emerged safely on the other side, and as I stood beside Ben in the hospital room, watching his parents sleep, the father recovering, the mother exhausted but relieved, I realized that my revenge had served its purpose. It had torn away the veil of arrogance and ignorance, exposing the vulnerabilities we all share as humans. Life would go on, and Mark and Susan would probably never fully shed their prejudices, but they had learned to respect the profession I represented, and they had learned to respect me. It was an uneasy truce cemented in the sterile confines of a hospital, but it was a beginning. And sometimes that's all you can ask for.